Welcome back to Wickedly Judged, the podcast and movement dedicated to exposing wrongful convictions and advocating for justice reform. I'm your host, Rebecca, and today we're diving into a case that epitomizes everything wrong with our justice system. The case of Senrick Wilkerson. Senrick's story is one of corruption, fabricated charges, and systemic failures at every level: police, prosecutors, judges, and even the higher courts. It's also a story of resilience and the ongoing fight for justice. Today, we'll revisit the details of his case, explore the systemic issues that led to his wrongful conviction, and discuss the lifelong consequences he continues to face, including registering on the sex offender list every 90 days. We'll also talk about how absolute immunity protects those responsible for these injustices, what we can do to fight for reform, and how you, our listeners, can join the movement to demand accountability and change. Before we begin, I want to remind you to visit our website, wickedlyjudge.com. There, you can leave comments about this episode, submit a case for us to review, or shop our merchandise. Every purchase supports our mission to advocate for justice reform. You can also reach out to us directly, wickedlyjudged@gmail.com, or call us 513-393-7452. Now, let's dig into Senrick Wilkerson's story. Let's start by revisiting the key details of Senrick's case and discussing the concept of due process. Due process is one of the most fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. It ensures that every person accused of a crime is treated fairly, given an opportunity to defend themselves, and protected from abuse of power by the state. But what happens when due process is ignored? In Senrick's case, the consequences were devastating. In 2008, Senrick was arrested and arraigned on a single charge of compelling prostitution. He was released on bond the very next day, but this was only the beginning of a much larger and more horrifying ordeal. 2 years after that original arrest, in 2010, prosecutors filed 2 new charges against Senrick: sexual performance of a child and sexual assault. These charges were filed without an arrest, without a grand jury, and without following the basic principles of due process. This means there was no proper review of evidence, no opportunity for Senrick to defend himself, and no transparency in how these charges were even brought forward. One of the most egregious violations of due process in Senrick's case was the prosecutor's deal with the victim. The prosecutor allegedly offered to drop the victim's own felony charges. She was facing 15 years. All she had to do was testify against Senrick and follow their script. This wasn't about seeking justice. It was about securing a conviction at any cost. By coercing the victim into testifying, the prosecutor weaponized the legal system against Senrick, violating his constitutional rights and undermining the integrity of the trial. Now let's talk for a minute about why due process matters. Due process is the legal guarantee that every person accused of a crime is treated fairly. It protects individuals from arbitrary actions by the government. ensuring that charges are based on credible evidence and that the accused has a chance to present their defense. When due process is ignored, it creates an environment where wrongful convictions become inevitable. Now I want to hear from you, our listeners. Have you or someone you know experienced a situation where your due process was violated? Send us your story, wickedlyjudged@gmail.com, or leave a comment on our website. Your voice matters in this fight for justice. Now that we've revisited the details of Senrick's case and explored how due process was violated, let's take a closer look at why these violations are so dangerous and how they impact not just the accused, but the entire justice system. Due process isn't just a legal formality. It's the foundation of fairness in our justice system. Without it, innocent people like Senrick can be convicted of crimes they didn't commit, while in most cases, the real perpetrators go free. Due process ensures that everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. It provides safeguards like proper arrest, impartial trials, and the right to present evidence and cross-examine witnesses. When these safeguards are ignored, the system becomes a tool for abuse rather than justice. When due process is violated, it doesn't just harm the accused. It undermines public trust in the justice system. It sends a message that the system is more concerned with securing convictions than actually seeking the truth. What do you think can be done to strengthen due process protections in our justice system? Share your thoughts with us on social media or send us an email. In Senrick's case, the lack of due process was compounded by prosecutorial misconduct. Now let's talk about how misconduct like this impacts cases and contributes to wrongful convictions. Prosecutorial misconduct occurs when prosecutors abuse their power or violate ethical standards just to secure a conviction. This can include withholding evidence, presenting false information, or pressuring witnesses to testify in a certain way. In Senrick's case, we see clear examples of this misconduct, which ultimately led to his wrongful conviction. Now let me talk about absolute immunity. If you don't know what that is, absolute immunity is a legal doctrine that protects prosecutors, judges, and other officials from being sued for actions they take within their official duties, even if those actions are unethical or illegal. This means that even when a prosecutor fabricates evidence or coerces testimony, they cannot be held personally accountable in civil court. And very rarely are they ever punished for the misconduct. Now you may be asking, why is absolute immunity a problem? Absolute immunity creates a system where there is no accountability for misconduct. It allows those in power to act without fear of consequences, even when their actions destroy lives. In Senrick's case, the prosecutor's actions were shielded by this doctrine, leaving him with no recourse to seek justice against those who wronged him. So how do we fight against absolute immunity? Well, first, you need to educate the public about the dangers of absolute immunity and how it enables systemic corruption. We need to support legislative efforts to reform or even eliminate absolute immunity, such as the proposed Ending Qualified Immunity Act, which seeks to hold officials accountable for their misconduct. We need to advocate for independent oversight committees to investigate and address misconduct by prosecutors, judges, and even law enforcement. So what are your thoughts on absolute immunity? Do you think it should be abolished? Share your views. Even after his time in prison, Senrick continues to face the consequences of his wrongful conviction. Let's talk about the impact of being forced to register on the sex offender list every 90 days and how it affects his life today. One of the most devastating aspects of Senrick's case is that even though he's no longer behind bars, he continues to suffer the consequences of his wrongful conviction. Every 90 days, Senrick is required to register on the sex offender list, a process that not only disrupts his life, but also stigmatizes him in the eyes of society. But what's even more troubling is how this requirement came to be. You see, there was a reporter that wanted to do a story on Senrick's case, and he reached out to the alleged victim to get her side of the story. Shortly after that phone call, the victim called the police and falsely claimed that Senrick was harassing and calling her. Despite having no evidence, no phone records, no witnesses, the authorities believed her and used this action to further punish Senrick. As a result, Senrick's registration requirement was changed from once a year to every 90 days. This wasn't about public safety. It was about continuing to cover up the corruption and fabricated charges that led to his wrongful conviction in the first place. Senrick's story is a heartbreaking example of how the justice system can fail innocent people, not just once, but over and over and over again. But it's also a call to action. Let's talk about what we can do to fight for justice reform and prevent cases like this from happening in the future. We need to demand accountability for police, prosecutors, and judges. First and foremost, we need to hold those in power accountable for their actions. Police officers who fabricate evidence, prosecutors who engage in misconduct, and judges who ignore due process must face consequences. This includes advocating for independent oversight committees that can investigate and address misconduct without bias. Public pressure plays a huge role here. Write to your local representatives, attend town halls, and demand accountability measures in your own community. We need to push to abolish absolute immunity. Absolute immunity is one of the biggest barriers to justice reform. It protects prosecutors and judges from being sued for actions they take within their official duties, even if those actions are unethical or illegal. This lack of accountability allows misconduct to flourish. We need to support legislative efforts to abolish absolute immunity, such as the Ending Qualified Immunity Act, and push for laws that hold officials accountable for their decisions. Educating the public about the dangers of absolute immunity is also critical. Many people don't even know this doctrine exists. We need to advocate for legislative reforms. We need to push for laws that strengthen due process protections and prevent wrongful convictions. This includes requiring the use of verified evidence before charges can be filed, mandating the recording of all interrogations to prevent coerced confessions, and ensuring that defendants have access to competent legal representation. Supporting organizations that lobby for these reforms is a great way to make your voice heard. We also need to support organizations fighting for justice reform. There are incredible organizations out there working to exonerate the wrongfully convicted and fight for systemic change. Donating to these organizations, volunteering your time, or even just sharing their work on social media can make a huge difference. At Wickedly Judged, we measure our advocacy impact by the number of successful motions we file to get cases back into court, and we couldn't do it without the support of people like you. We need to raise awareness and educate others. One of the most powerful tools that we have is awareness. Share stories like Senrick's with your friends, family, and community. Talk about the flaws in the justice system and how they disproportionately affect marginalized communities. The more people understand these issues, the harder it becomes for those in power to ignore them. You can also use social media to amplify these stories and connect with others who are passionate about justice reform. We also need to advocate for reforming the sex offender registry. As we've seen in Senrick's case, the sex offender registry can be weaponized against innocent people. We need to push for reforms that ensure the registry is used as a tool for public safety, not as a punishment for those who were wrongfully convicted or falsely accused. This includes advocating for evidence-based reviews of registry requirements and ensuring that accusations are thoroughly investigated before life-altering decisions are made. And you can always empower yourself to take action. You don't need to be a lawyer or a politician to make a difference. You can write letters to incarcerated individuals to let them know they're not forgotten. Attend rallies or protests for justice reform, or even start your own advocacy group in your community. Every small action adds up to create meaningful change. The fight for justice reform can feel overwhelming at times, but stories like Senrick's remind us why this work is so important. By taking action, whether it's through advocacy, education, or direct support, we can create a system that values truth over convictions and ensures that no one else has to endure what Senrick has been through. Thank you for joining us as we recap the case of Senrick Wilkerson and explore the systemic issues that led to his wrongful conviction. His story is a powerful reminder of why we need justice reform and accountability in our legal system. I want to take a moment to share something personal. I read Senrick's book, Innocent Black Man, and I couldn't believe that something like this could actually happen until I saw all the proof laid out in his book. And of course, I did my own research into his case. The evidence of corruption, fabricated charges, and systemic failures is undeniable, and it's heartbreaking to see how deeply the system failed him, a system that is meant to protect him. His book is a must-read for anyone who wants to truly understand the human cost of injustice. You can purchase Innocent Black Man now on Amazon. It's a deeply personal and eye-opening account of Senrick's experiences, and I encourage all of you to read it and share it with others. Stories like his deserve to be heard. I also want to remind you to visit wickedlyjudge.com to leave comments, submit a case for us to review, or shop our merchandise. Every purchase supports our mission to advocate for justice reform and helps us continue to expose these injustices. A special thank you to JP Verse for our intro and outro music, and Veteran Alliance for sponsoring this podcast and supporting our mission. And as always, thank you to you, our listeners, for being a part of this movement and helping us fight for change. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay fighting for justice, because no one deserves to be wickedly judged.